you were going to talk about what it was like growing up as the daughter of Lyndon Baines Johnson and Claudia Taylor Johnson. What are your memories growing up?
Well, I don't remember when my father wasn't majority leader of the United States Senate. And in that day and time, that was the most important Democrat in the country, certainly, and one of the top public figures. So I don't remember not feeling like I was public property. And politics for our family was a little bit like the family farm. On the family farm, somebody milks the cows, somebody feeds the chickens, somebody bales the hay, somebody runs a tractor, but everybody from the cradle to the grave has some sort of job. And so really from early childhood, I understood that I had my responsibilities. I understood that I came from a philosophy of small children were to be seen, enjoyed, but not necessarily heard very long. And my father, by the way, amended that dramatically when he became a grandfather, as you know. But when Mr. Sam would, for example, come over, I knew that it was my responsibility to meet him and greet him and hug on him and love, and then it was also my responsibility when my father got ready to talk shop for me to disappear. And one of my favorite childhood memories of defiance was one time Mr. Sam came for dinner, as he often did. And he had a fabulous way with children. He had a way to making them feel like they were the center of his world. I guess a bachelor can do that fairly easily because they can have all the fun of it and none of the responsibility. But I would climb up in his lap and he would focus on me, and it was time for me to be dismissed. And my father said, "Luci Baines, give Mr. Sam a big kiss and come give your daddy a big kiss and go on up to bed." And I mentioned that it was only 7:30 or some hour that I felt was far earlier than the hour I needed to go to bed. And I wiggled up into Mr. Sam's arms even tighter. And Daddy kept motioning kind of graciously, gingerly, but move on out, child. And finally, and I kept hugging Mr. Sam ever the more tighter. And finally, Mr. Sam looked at him and said, "Lyndon, can't you see this child wants to be here with me? She's not interrupting us. Let her stay." And I look back on other first families being evaluated in terms of rebellious youth. And that story, or the story of me changing the spelling of my name from Y to I, or becoming a Roman Catholic, these were my moments of defiance. Hardly in the greater scheme of things much of a rebellion, I suspect. But growing up with Lady Bird and Lyndon Johnson as parents meant growing up as a piece of public property. It meant growing up with political responsibilities of needing to socially meet and greet and take people on tours and talk to people about their concerns, their constituent issues. It meant answering the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning from some broken-hearted woman whose husband was lost and she needed her United States Senator to help solve her Social Security problem or figure out how to get somebody out of jail because they were drunk. I mean, just all kinds of those very on-stage moments. It meant having very little private life. It meant having 2 vacations that I can remember all my childhood that we went on. One to Daytona Beach. Gosh, it was delicious. And one to South Texas, to a dude ranch. And those were brilliant memories for me. because I was with my mother and my daddy and my sister, and it was just our family. But there were, of course, other congressional families along who we were sharing this event with. And in all candor, I don't think I ever remember having eaten dinner alone with my mother and father and with or without my sister until the White House. A lot of people think that living in the White House must be a very goldfish bowl experience, and it is. But there's a flip side of that. And it was harder for Lyndon Johnson to do the same kind of traveling that he once did. He also came home for lunch, as he never had before. So I had more personal, intimate, one-on-one, just family times in the White House than I'd ever had before.
Was he a loving father?
Was he a loving father? Oh, he was an extraordinarily loving father. He was, my father had a way of making everybody feel like they were the center of his world. And he certainly made me feel like I was the center of his world. I will never forget as long as I live how at our 4921 30th Place home, very modest home, my mother had really been saving the pennies in the piggy bank to get new carpeting. And she'd gotten the entire house newly carpeted. It meant the world to her. And just as the last hammer went down to lay that carpet, Lyndon Johnson went down to Virginia and came back, I think, with Homer Thornberry. I may be wrong, but I think Homer was along for the ride. And he came in, and I was in the basement, and he called and said, Luci Baines, come here. Whenever he said Luci Baines, I knew that there was either I was in big time trouble or there was big time wonderment around the corner. And I came running up the stairs, yes sir daddy, yes sir daddy. And I got to the top of the stairs. He said, Luci Baines, I need you to open this box for me. Of course, he didn't need me for anything. Certainly not to open the box. But I said, yes sir, I'll open the box. And I opened the box, and out jumped little Beagle Johnson. My mother and I were laughing the other day when we rode over the ranch. We were telling some of the U.S. Secret Service what pieces of property belonged to the Park Service and what pieces of property belonged to us and what their names had been. And we were laughing about how we always named the pieces of property we had after the former owners. And then I mentioned to her, I said, Mother, but that's because that's how ingenious we were. We also named our first dog, Beagle, our Beagle dog, Beagle, little Beagle Johnson, give him an LBJ brand to him. And she said, yes, but the epitome, the apex of all of that was when we named the other two dogs, him and her. Not saying a whole lot for our imaginations in naming.
What did the dog do to your new carpeting?
Oh, my mother, the look on my father's face was ethereal. He got so much pleasure out of knowing what he'd done for me. My mother said it looked like the angels had just landed on my shoulders. I was just so ecstatic. And my father really looked like the happiest man on earth. And my mother looked absolutely stricken. And the little Beagle Johnson did exactly what every other little puppy did. He left presents all over the house, and her carpets were very soon in the same condition that her carpets before had been in, and she was just heartsick about it. But she said, how could I? With Lyndon feeling like he was the world's greatest hero, and Luci feeling like her prayers had been answered. How could I come in here like the Grinch that stole Christmas and say no way? Additionally, and I think it's important to share this, nobody enjoyed giving more than Lyndon Johnson. If you gave him a present, if it was from your hand or your heart, if it wasn't quote-unquote store-bought, if it had taken a lot of imagination and consideration, he adored it. Helen Lindo Gordon gave him a pillow one time that all of you have enjoyed at the ranch, and it said, "This is my ranch and I do as I please," or something along those lines. And he adored that pillow because here this wonderful young 23-year-old assistant to my mother, a secretary, had saved her pennies to give. Didn't cost a lot, but gosh, it captured the sentiment a lot. But mostly what delighted Daddy was not the getting, it was the giving. It was the giving of gifts from the head, the heart, the hands. He loved sentimental journeys. A couple of years before he died, he tried to dress up his ranch foreman, Dale Malachek, as Santa Claus and have all the children from Stonewall into the hangar because he wanted to give them Christmas presents. And Dale Malachek, graduate of A&M, he just, he was a countryman and he just didn't like that idea of dressing up in costume. It just didn't fit his personality, he felt. And Daddy, he prodded and he pushed and he cajoled and he did everything but just dictate, and Dale held his ground. So finally Daddy said, "Well, if you won't do it, I'll go ahead and do it. I'll dress up as Santa Claus." And Dale looked him straight in the face and said, "You just do that, sir." And he did, and never was a happier Santa Claus at the Christmas party than Lyndon Johnson. So I look back at that image of him giving me that big old dog, and what a thrill it gave him to see me happy. And I look back at that image at the other end of life when he dressed up as Santa Claus and given toys out to the children of his neighbors, some of whom had means and some of whom that would be their only Christmas present maybe. And the thread of continuity runs through. He adored making a difference in people's lives.
Luci, you talk about Sam Rayburn. Obviously, some of the world's most famous, most powerful people came through your life as you were growing up. When your father was visiting them one-on-one or one-on-two, did they always talk business, or did they talk small talk, just socialize? What were the conversations like between your father and these people?
Well, one of the things that my father liked to do is to find the common threads. Find the common threads with heads of state or senators or congressmen, find what was important to them, and relate it back to his own experience. I remember when Prime Minister and Mrs. Eshkol came to the LBJ Ranch for a state visit, how much Daddy liked to talk with the president about how this rugged, tough soil in the hill country reminded him a lot of Israel, where trying to eke out a living was a very difficult thing to do, and how faith had given his pioneering family the courage and the stamina to forge on through, and how much he felt that was a common bond that he had with the people of Israel, because their faith and their courage and their determination to come and reason together had made it possible for them to make a place in the world against all odds for them. Oh, just a second. Give me a second. I've got a thought. Oh, I've got one. My son, Lyndon, was born June 21st, 1967. And as you may or may not recall, those were the days of Glassboro, and we all look back and realize how important that meeting was with Kosygin, because there was a chance for exchange from the head of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic and the United States on a first on a head of state level for the first time in a long time. And so there was a lot of tension in the family. And of course, there was a lot of tension in the family with the idea that I was going to have a baby any day. So Patrick Lyndon Nugent discovered America on June 21st, 67. And about 3 days later, my father left Glassboro to come down and meet his grandson. And when he did, he came in and he said, "Lucy, I want to tell you something. I want you to remember this. I want you to be able to tell this boy this. And I want you to be able to tell his grandchildren this. That from the moment he was born, he was the answer to his granddaddy's prayers, and his mama was, in ways that you can't understand. Not just for my dream for the future, but my salvation for the present." I said, "Daddy, there's a story behind this. What do you mean?" He said, "You're darn right there is." He said, "I realized that the first words that I said to Prime Minister Kosygin make all the difference in the world in the tenor of how the rest of the exchange went. But what were those first words going to be?" And I anguished over it and anguished over it. And then you and Lyndon saw fitting that he would discover this bright and wonderful world. And God had provided me the answer. So I went to Prime Minister Kosygin and I said, "You know, Mr. Kosygin, I understand that you're a grandfather." And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, you know what? This morning, my little girl made me a grandfather too." And I think that there are a lot of differences that we have, Mr. Kosygin, no doubt about it. But I know for sure that every grandfather on earth wants their grandchildren to grow up in a peaceful world. The difference, Mr. Kosygin, is you and I can do something about it. Let's get to work. So you asked me earlier about what Lyndon Johnson made you feel like. I mean, can you imagine coming to your daughter's bedside after she's had a baby and telling her that that having this baby had somehow been helpful to advancing world peace? I mean, I know darn well it didn't advance world peace. It certainly brought great peace and prosperity to our family. But Daddy loved to make you feel important, whoever you were, whether you were his child or whether you were a king or queen or prime minister, or whether you were a farmer or a factory worker, because he felt there was something very worthy in all of us.
There were long periods when you were separated from your parents.
Sure.
Tell us about that.
Well, it was a way of life. It was expected. And I guess some children might be angry or resentful or estranged. And I have no doubt that there were times that I was frustrated and maybe shared that, and resentful and maybe shared that. But before it was all over, before my father left this world when I was just 25, there had been many, many, many years of understanding and respect and appreciation. That the fact that he was gone a lot and that we didn't have the kind of family times that I might have aspired to and might have wished for, well, because he was trying to make my future and the future of my children and my children's children a far more meaningful one. And that he had done all a human being could to try to create a world that where there was more justice, and a justice that we could be proud of and grateful for. So as a child, did I want him to go to work at 9 and come home at 5, and for us to have to leave it to be for a family? Absolutely. But by the time I got to be a teenager, Daddy, we're talking about this common thread of making people feel important. I think my father realized that I could be an extraordinary liability to the '64 campaign, or just to his presidency period. So what do you do about it? And Lyndon Johnson just was a master of finding out what was important to people, appealing to their egos. And he had some rather graphic phrases, which I don't think he would want any of his daughters or wife to repeat, but they made reference to whether you were going to be in or outside of the tent. And he realized it was better for me to be in the tent, meaning in his efforts, in the scope of what he was trying to do, rather than be outside carping about it. And so the '64 campaign came, and he came to me and he said, "Luci Baines, I'm in a sinking ship. I need your help. I need you to go all over this country. I need you to be my eyes and ears like Mrs. Roosevelt was for FDR. I need you to tell the people of this country how important they are to me and how much I need their vote, and to thank them for their service and for their patriotism, and how without them I can't do what needs to be done for the greater good, the greatest number. And I can't be everywhere, Luci. I need you. I cannot invent another daughter before November 3rd. So, sweetie, I'm asking you to take this bucket and help me bail, baby, bail. I want you to go all over this country, and I want every person you meet at any fundraiser, any fire hall, any school cafeteria, any gas station. I want you, in every event you go to, campaigning for me, I want you to find 3 people, and I want you to come home and report back into me about 3 things that were important to those people. Well, you know, teenagers are pretty narcissistic by nature. It's just a time in our lives when we are focusing on who we are and trying to figure out who we are. And a teenager who's being interviewed by the press and asked questions over and over and over about themselves can get pretty consumed with that. So it was so wise of my father to get me out of myself so I covered 26 states by myself in front of groups from 5 to 5,000 campaigning for him. You know, I believed what he said. I thought I was really important. I knew I wasn't as important as he said I was, but I liked the fact that he wanted me to help him. And you know, I have an extraordinary legacy. I've gotten a chance to meet some of the great movers and shakers of my time. I have financial security for the rest of my life. I had 2 parents who adored me till the day my daddy died. But as I look back at all the gifts that came my way as a result of being the daughter of Lady Bird and Lyndon Johnson, I think that admonishment to every event I go to be able to meet 3 new people and come home with 3 things that are important to them, was one of those invaluable legacies that when the roll is called up yonder over on the other shore, I'll really treasure most. And I can guarantee you I'm 54 years old today. And every event I go to, I find myself sometimes in the last 5 minutes running around trying to meet another person, trying to find out 3 things that are important to him, because I always have that feeling I'm still checking in with him.
Because he'll ask you.
Because he'll ask me. And I show that look of grave disappointment if you didn't grow. He used to say, when the mouth is engaged, the mind is usually disengaged. You don't do much learning when you're talking. And so that sense of accountability. You know, Lyndon Johnson's first job was as a school teacher, and his last job was a school teacher, and I think he always thought that being a school teacher was one of the most important jobs anyone could ever have. And he did a lot of teaching in our family, by parable usually, by story. And there were times when you could see that you hadn't made the mark. In fact, one of the things that was interesting when my husband Ian and I married, right before we married, we realized that we were British and American, Roman Catholic and Protestant, very, very different backgrounds. And so we thought it would be wise to go and talk to a counselor about how we did the merging of these two different families and what things we needed to look out for because we both had children, etc. And in doing so, I told him a story about when I went to meet my husband's family. I'd met them all, given a little speech, and we'd gone on about our ways, and I'd said, how did it go? And everybody'd said, oh, well, I thought it went beautifully, the weather was great. And I said, well, did I do all right? And they said, oh, you look beautiful, and the food was good. And, I kind of fished and fished and fished, and there was no response at all as to what they thought of the little speech that I made, and if I had said what needed to be said, what they thought was appropriate. And so the marriage counselor that we were talking to said to Ian, turned to Ian and said, did you know that something was wrong and it was upsetting Lucy? And he said, yes. He said, did you have the foggiest idea why she was upset? And he said, not the remotest. And Lucy, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. And his counselor turned to me and he said, now, Lucy, after every event of your life, did you have a family powwow? And did you all sit around and grade each other's papers? And I said, yes, of course. And he said, now let me let you in on a little secret. I said, what's that? And he said, not all families do that. And we had always graded each other's papers. It was always a part of life. It never occurred to me that I wasn't going to have to be accountable to my father, and we weren't going to grade each other's papers. He was always a school teacher. I have a couple of stories that refer to that. One was we had what we called daddy duty in the family. When my mother was out of town, and my sister and I were responsible for being with Daddy if there was some sort of public event and going with him. My mother was out of town, the signing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. I can't believe that was the case, but she was. And so was my sister. So I was asked to go, and I was 17 years old, and I'm afraid not as appreciative as I ought to have been about what an extraordinary privilege that was to be there. So I said, certainly I'd be delighted to do that. Yes, sir, I'd go. And so I thought I'd be running downstairs, go to the East Room. They'd sign the bill. It'd be, an hour out of my adolescent day. Next thing I hear, we're going up to the Capitol. So I got into the car with my father and I said, Daddy, I don't understand. Why are we going to the Capitol? Why don't we just sign it here at the White House? For my convenience, of course. And my father looked at me, the teacher always in him, and shook his head and bared it like, oh, where did I go wrong? And he said, you don't get it, do you? And I said, no, sir. Why are we going up to the Capitol? Let them come down here. Do you? He said, oh, no, darling. These brave men and women who have voted this bill into law have sacrificed potentially their entire political careers. We need to go to them. We need to highlight them. We need to tell the world that it is they that are the courageous, and that they will be responsible for seeing that future Congresses will truly reflect the fabric of America, and that they are our heroes. That's why we need to do it. And we need to go to the Congress, because it is the Congress that has made this possible, and it is the Congress that's going to be changed forever as a result of it. So I realized how small-sighted I'd been. And
Lucy, were you in any way surprised that he emerged as a strong civil rights resident?
Absolutely not. I mean, it was so much in him. The next story along those lines about the civil rights was after that piece of legislation was passed, he went and took the first pen and gave it to Everett Dirksen. And we got back into the car and I said, Daddy, there are all those civil rights leaders up there. Why didn't you give that first pen, that most important pen, to one of these great civil rights heroes? He looked at me again, shook his head and said, you don't get it, do you? No, I don't. And he said, because all those civil rights leaders were already for that legislation. I didn't have to do anything to convince them. It was Everett Dirksen making the courageous step that he did, and stepping up to the plate like he did, and bringing the people he brought with him that made the difference and made these civil rights leaders' dream and my dream come true. That's why he got the first pen. But Daddy was really blessed, and blessed as my mother had not been, in being born into an environment where he just didn't have any exposure in his earliest years to racial discrimination or ethnic discrimination. I mean, he was poor, but everybody was poor around him. I mean, he didn't even have much of this rich folks, poor folks, because nobody really had much. And there weren't any, black people that white people would climb on top of in order to try to have some supremacy, or people of other ethnic backgrounds, etc. And I think that was a real blessing in his life. He just didn't carry that historical baggage. So he just didn't really feel any of it. And, red and yellow, black and white, they're all precious in his sight, was something that describes who Lyndon Johnson was all about. He just loved the little children of the world. I mean, he just felt, if given an opportunity to get an education, that the passports out of the shackles of ethnic, racial hatred and ignorance was available for everybody. And he was desperate to do something about it. But I mean, he treated, there were African Americans that were part of our family. We had a cook, Zephyr, and a maid, Helen, and Jean, her husband, was a yardman, courier service kind of person in our lives. And I mean, Daddy was always turning to them to find out what their friends, their family were thinking about what issues were. They were people, and they were members of his family, and and he loved them. I'll never forget one time when and many people have heard this story, and maybe Linda's given her version of it, but we were getting ready to go back to Texas, and we spent half the year in Texas and half the year in Washington. It was always crazy. We were always running bookity and to catch the plane. And we were running out the door, and Jean was standing there, and Jean was going to drive our car back with a whole bunch of stuff in it. And all of a sudden, my daddy went, and a few words I won't repeat, and realized that he had not made plans for a Beagle Dog to get on the airplane. And you had to have, you had to talk to the airlines before, and you had to get the kennel, and you had to make all the arrangements, and he hadn't done it. So what was he going to do? We were about to miss this airplane. So he turned to Jean, who, Jean had 2 words for Daddy: yes, sir. And that was one of the many reasons that Daddy adored Jean. And so he said, Jean, no problem. Jean, one more time. Jean, you'll be our hero. Oh, Jean, we are so grateful to you. Thank God you're always here when I need you, Jean. Will you take Beagle? And turned to walk out the door because he knew that the words were going to be, yes, sir. And their words are seared in my mind for as long as I live. Because Gene, and the only time I ever heard him take exception to Daddy about anything, said, "No, sir." My father sort of turned in his tracks and turned around and he said, "Pardon me?" He said, "No, sir, I can't and I won't." Daddy said, "You're not going to help me out in my hour of need when I need you most? Gene, you've always been there for me. Why not?" He said, "Senator Johnson, I mean, it's going to be harder than hell for me, a black man, to go across this country in this big fancy car of yours with all your big fancy stuff. But there ain't no way me, a black man, can do it with a dog." And there was absolute silence. My father went over to Shane, put his arms around and said, "You're right. I'm sorry. We'll handle it. Forgive me."
You have a very meaningful memento of the '64 Civil Rights Act.
Oh, I do. I do. July the 2nd, 1964, the Public Accommodations Act was signed into law. And that was my 17th birthday. And you can imagine what an extraordinary birthday present that was, to know that on your birthday was also going to be the birthday of opportunity for people of all racial backgrounds to have access to our restaurants, our hotels, our public accommodations, our planes, trains, buses. And recently I made a move, and I was cleaning through my photo albums, and out slipped a card, birthday card from my father, dated July the 2nd, 1964. And it was actually timed. Lyndon Johnson, always the history teacher, 12:10 p.m. And he was just telling me what I meant to him and how grateful he was for the day I discovered America. But in the midst of all of, I mean, I cannot conceive of what that day must have been like for him. And he took the time out to write me a handwritten note. Now, by the way, it was signed Daddy. And we were speaking earlier and laughing about the fact that in one of my more defiant moves as a young, I don't know, 12, 13-year-old, I went to my father and I indicated to him that it was very hard for me to receive letters from him at camp that I knew had been written by his secretary. But when they were signed Lyndon B. Johnson, it was just too much. Oh, my father wouldn't have hurt me ever for anything. So after that, you know, he would just go signing Lyndon Baines Johnson, because he signed Lyndon Baines Johnson 1,000 times a day. So he would sign it Lyndon Baines Johnson. Having realized what he'd done, he would then put a parenthesis after it, Daddy, as if I didn't know, or just to clarify his paternity. And then years later, when he was writing me and or my son Lyndon, he would write Daddy after it, and then he'd put Papa after that, just to make sure we got the family tree right. So it became a family joke. But to have this memento telling me that he loves me on a day when he was opening up the doors of love and opportunity for so many more Americans. Gosh, if the house were to burn down, I think that'd be one of the first things I'd run for after I made sure my family was out.